January 3, 2026. 0300 hours. Caracas, Venezuela. The city was asleep, sweltering under the tropical humidity. High above the skyline, the air defense radars of the Venezuelan military, the Comprehensive Strategic Command Operational Defense System, were spinning. These weren't old Cold War relics. They were modern, integrated systems. Russian S-300VM, anti-2500 batteries capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, upgraded with Chinese JY-27 VHF radars designed specifically to detect stealth aircraft. They were manned by crews trained in Moscow and Beijing. They were scanning the Caribbean sky for threats, confident in their anti-access/area denial bubble. They saw nothing. The electronic spectrum was quiet. The streets around the presidential palace, Miraflores, and the primary military garrison at Fuerte Tiuna were patrolled by the Guardia de Honor, arguably the most paranoid, well-paid, and heavily armed security detail in South America. They had one job: keep the president alive. Then the lights went out. Not just the street lights in the palace district, but the digital lights on the radar consoles. A cyber weapon planted months in advance by the Tailored Access Operations, TAO, unit of the NSA and US Cyber Command, executed a zero-day exploit. It didn't just crash the system, it spoofed it. It severed the command and control links between the radar sites and the missile batteries, while simultaneously feeding a loop of clear skies to the operator's screens. The Venezuelan colonels sat in their bunkers, drinking coffee, looking at green lights, completely unaware that their entire integrated air defense system IADS had been lobotomized. In that blind spot, created by code rather than explosives, 4 modified Ghost Hawk stealth helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, materialized out of the humid night air. These machines are acoustically masked to sound like the wind or local traffic until they are right on top of you. They didn't hover, they assaulted. Operators from the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, likely a combined element of Delta Force and DevGru, fast-roped onto the roof of a specific, nondescript safe house deep within the Fuerte Tiuna military complex. They didn't search the building. They didn't kick down every door looking for their target. They didn't have to. They knew exactly which room the target was sleeping in. They knew his biometric rhythms. They knew his blood pressure. They knew that his personal security detail was in the middle of a shift change. A specific procedural vulnerability window of exactly 4 minutes that occurs only at 0300 hours on Tuesdays. 12 minutes later, the helicopters lifted off. They carried a high-value package, the president of Venezuela, zip-tied and hooded. By the time the sun rose over the Caribbean, the dictator was in a federal holding cell in New York, awaiting trial, and the U.S. strike force was refueling over the Atlantic without having suffered a single casualty. Compare this to the Russian attempt to take Kiev in 2022. That was a bludgeoning, clumsy failure that exposed the rot in the Russian military. The assault on Hostomel Airport was a disaster. Russia tried to take a capital city for 3 years and failed. The United States took the heart of Caracas in 30 minutes. This wasn't just a raid, it was a flex. It was a demonstration of omnipotence. Operation Absolute Resolve shocked the world not just because of its audacity, but because of its perfection. It proved that despite the political chaos in Washington, despite the screaming headlines about a divided America and a polarized Congress, the U.S. military machine is still the deadliest, most capable organization human beings have ever created. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are looking at the terrifying competence that hides behind the political circus. The world is currently freaking out. The headlines are screaming about cowboy diplomacy, imperial overreach, and the end of international law. But we are here to look at the cold, hard mechanics of power. The thesis for this episode is simple. Everyone is asking if the US is out of control. The reality is that the US intelligence community is operating at a level that borders on the supernatural. And for Australia, a nation sitting blind in the vastness of the Pacific, the question isn't, can we trust the US president? The question is, can we afford to lose access to the machine that pulled off the Venezuela raid? We are going to break down the God-tier intelligence that made Operation Absolute Resolve possible, the fallout of the Kevin Rudd resignation, and why the Five Eyes Alliance is the only thing standing between Australia and darkness. Let's dissect the raid itself. The media is focusing on the Special Forces operators, the door kickers with the quadnogs and the suppressed rifles. But the door kickers are just the arrow. The intelligence community is the archer. To pull this off, the CIA and the NSA had to achieve total penetration of the Venezuelan regime. This wasn't a lucky guess. They knew which safe house the target would use on that specific night. Venezuela has 8 primary presidential bunkers scattered across the city. The target rotates between them randomly to avoid assassination. He uses body doubles. He rarely sleeps in the same place twice. How did the US know? They were likely listening to the target's breathing. In the world of modern signals intelligence SIGINT, the NSA doesn't just tap phones. They tap the Internet of Things. They tap the smartwatches of the bodyguards. They tap the maintenance logs of the HVAC systems in the bunkers. By fusing thousands of data points, a sudden spike in electricity usage in Bunker 4 suggesting the air conditioning was cranked up, a bodyguard ordering a specific type of food delivery to a specific gate, a localized jam in the cellular network that follows the president's convoy, the US intelligence machine built a pattern of life, so accurate they could predict the dictator's movements better than he could himself. This is information dominance. While the Venezuelan regime was relying on Russian counterintelligence advisors to sweep for bugs and check for wiretaps, the US was watching them from space, listening to them through their own infrastructure, and mapping the interior of their buildings using thermal imaging satellites that can see heat signatures through concrete. The execution was surgical. The cyber attack that blinded the air defense system was timed to the millisecond. It wasn't a brute force jamming attack that would alert the whole country, it was a spoofing attack. The Venezuelan radar operators sat at their screens seeing green lights, seeing a clear sky, while US helicopters flew right through their sectors. They didn't know they were blind until it was all over. This level of capability is terrifying. It means there is no sanctuary. It means that if you are an enemy of the United States, you are never safe. You can hide in a bunker, you can surround yourself with S-400 missiles, you can hire 1,000 guards. But if the US decides to come for you, they will find you and they will take you. The Rudd shock. But competence comes with a cost. And the cost was absolute diplomatic chaos. On January 13, 2026, 10 days after the raid, the news broke from Washington. Kevin Rudd, the Australian ambassador to the United States, had tendered his resignation. It wasn't a polite retirement. It was a protest. Rudd, a veteran statesman, a former prime minister, and a true believer in the international rules-based order, reportedly told the Prime Minister that he could no longer represent Australia to an administration that acted like a cartel rather than a government. In his leaked cable, he called the raid reckless, illegal, and a violation of sovereignty that sets a dangerous precedent for the world. He argued that kidnapping a head of state, no matter how odious, was a line that civilized nations simply do not cross. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. Pundits in Canberra began asking the question that has haunted Australian strategy for decades: is the US a rogue superpower? The argument goes like this: if the US is willing to kidnap a head of state in the middle of the night, what else are they willing to do? Will they drag Australia into a war with China over a minor skirmish in the South China Sea? Will they violate Australian sovereignty if we disagree with them on trade or climate policy? Are we tied to a chaotic, unpredictable giant that is tearing up the rulebook whenever it suits them? This is alliance anxiety. It is the fear that our great protector has gone mad. And looking at the headlines, you can understand the fear. The White House press briefings following the raid were aggressive. The president didn't apologize, he spiked the football. He dared other nations to complain. It felt like the behavior of an empire that has stopped caring about what the world thinks, an empire that operates on the maxim: the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. For a middle power like Australia, which relies on stability, rules, and international norms to protect its trade and sovereignty, this behavior is terrifying. We want a world where borders are respected, where diplomats talk in quiet rooms, and where disputes are settled in the UN, not by black helicopters in the middle of the night. Kevin Rudd's resignation was the embodiment of this anxiety. He represents the old world, the world of summits, treaties, and polite fiction. He looked at the Venezuela raid and saw the collapse of diplomacy. But here is the counter-argument. Here is the strategic realist perspective. Kevin Rudd was right about the diplomacy, but he was wrong about the survival. Diplomacy is a luxury of peace. When the world is safe, we can afford to worry about norms and precedents. But the world of 2026 is not safe. We are in a Cold War that is rapidly heating up. We are facing revisionist powers in Russia and China who do not care about the rules. China is building islands in international waters. Russia is invading its neighbors. Iran is arming proxies. In this environment, unpredictability is not a liability, it is a deterrent. Think about the message the Venezuela raid sent to Beijing. Xi Jinping watched the US snatch a Russian-protected ally from his own capital in 30 minutes. He watched US intelligence penetrate a security bubble that was supposed to be impenetrable. He watched US cyberweapons dismantle an air defense network similar to the one protecting Shanghai. Do you think that makes him more likely or less likely to invade Taiwan tomorrow? It makes him pause. It forces him to wonder, if they can do that to Maduro, what can they do to my generals? What can they do to my command bunkers? Do they know where I sleep? The Rudd shock is a reaction to the method, not the result. The result was the removal of a hostile dictator who was destabilizing the region. The method was brute force. Australia is uncomfortable with the method because we like to think of ourselves as the good guys who follow the rules. But in the dark alleys of geopolitics, sometimes the good guys have to carry knives. And sometimes you need a friend who knows how to use one. The resignation of an ambassador is a headline. It cycles through the news for a week. But the capability demonstrated in Caracas, the ability to project power anywhere, anytime with absolute precision, that is a strategic reality that lasts for decades. Australia has to ask itself a hard question. Do we want a polite ally who loses or a rude ally who wins? Do we want an ally who writes stern letters while our trade routes are cut, or an ally who can blind the enemy's radar and remove the threat? The Five Eyes reality. This brings us to the core value proposition. Why does Australia put up with the chaos? Why do we stay in the alliance when the US goes rogue? It's not because of shared history. It's not because of cultural affinity or the fact that we both speak English. It is because of the panopticon. Australia is a continent-sized island with a tiny population. We have a coastline of 30,000 kilometers. We are surrounded by the vast, empty oceans of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. We have neighbors to the north, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, with populations 10 times our size. On our own we are blind. We have the Jindalee Over the Horizon Radar Network, JORN, which is excellent, but it has limits. It can see over the horizon, but it cannot see inside the Politburo in Beijing. It cannot track every Chinese submarine lurking in the deep trenches of the Pacific. It cannot intercept the encrypted communications of terrorist cells planning attacks in Southeast Asia. To survive, Australia relies on the Five Eyes intelligence network. And specifically, we rely on the United States. The raid in Venezuela proved that the US intelligence machine is operating at a level that no other nation can match. It proved that the US has God mode enabled on the real-world server. When we talk about US intelligence, we aren't just talking about spies in trench coats meeting in parking garages. We are talking about the industrial scale of the National Security Agency, NSA, and the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. These agencies operate a constellation of satellites, the KH-11 Keyhole series and the newer, classified platforms, that can read a license plate from space or detect the thermal signature of a missile engine warming up. They operate undersea cable taps that suck up the internet traffic of entire continents, processing petabytes of data every second. They operate supercomputers in Utah that can crack encryption codes that would take a normal computer a million years to solve. Through the Joint Defense Facility Pine Gap in Central Australia, the US and Australia jointly operate satellites that intercept ballistic missile telemetry and signals intelligence from across Eurasia. This facility is the ears of the Western Alliance. It sucks up the radio waves, the cell phone calls, and the radar emissions of half the planet. If Australia were to walk away from the US alliance because of diplomatic disagreements, or because we didn't like the optics of the Venezuela raid, we would go blind overnight. We would lose the ability to track the Chinese Navy. We would lose the early warning of a missile launch. We would lose the deep insights into the intentions of foreign leaders. We would be a deaf and blind man walking in a minefield. The cost of replicating this capability is impossible. Australia could spend its entire GDP on intelligence for 10 years and not match what the US spends in a month. Kevin Rudd's resignation frames the alliance as a political choice. It suggests that we can choose to be allied or not based on whether we like the current US president or their policies. But military planners know that the alliance is a structural necessity. You don't trust the US president. You trust the US capability. Presidents come and go every 4 years. The NSA is forever. The satellites are forever. The undersea cables are forever. The Venezuela raid demonstrated that when the US wants to see something, they see it. When they want to touch someone, they touch them. That capability is the ultimate security guarantee for Australia. If we are ever threatened, if a hostile power tries to blockade our ports or attack our cities, we need the monster on our side. We need the intelligence apparatus that can find the enemy fleet in the vast ocean and guide our missiles to the target. Walking away from that capability because of moral outrage would be national suicide. It would be cutting off our own eyes to spite our face. The verdict: the dust is settling on Operation Absolute Resolve. The diplomats are still writing furious cables. The United Nations is holding emergency sessions. Kevin Rudd is packing his bags in Washington. But in the military academies and intelligence agencies of the world, the lesson has been learned. The raid didn't prove that the US is untrustworthy. It proved that the US is the only ally that actually gets the job done. We live in an era of performative politics. European leaders give great speeches about democracy and human rights, but they couldn't produce enough artillery shells to save Ukraine. The UN passes resolutions, but it cannot stop a genocide. The United States, for all its flaws, for all its chaos, for all its cowboy tendencies, is the only nation with the capacity to enforce its will on the world. It is the only nation that can turn intelligence into action instantly. For Australia, this is an uncomfortable truth. We prefer the quiet life. We prefer the rules-based order. But the rules are only as good as the enforcer. And the enforcer just reminded everyone that he is still the toughest guy in the room. The rogue superpower narrative is a distraction. The real story is the competent superpower. The raid in Venezuela was a masterclass in intelligence, cyber warfare, and special operations. It was a display of Western prowess that should make every Australian sleep a little sounder at night. Why? Because that same intelligence machine that found Maduro is currently watching the South China Sea. That same cyber capability that blinded the Venezuelan radars is currently mapping the Chinese power grid. That same special forces capability is currently training with our commandos in Perth. In a dangerous world, you don't pick your allies based on their politeness. You pick them based on their power. You want the guys who can kidnap a dictator on your side, not against you. Australia should not trust the US to be nice. We should not trust them to be polite. But we should absolutely trust them to be dangerous. And right now, dangerous is exactly what we need. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you think Kevin Rudd was right to resign, or was he playing by the rules of a game that no longer exists? Let us know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay realistic, and we'll see you in the next one.